This is Ralph Rensler, director of the Smithsonian Bicentennial Folklife Festival. If you enjoyed the festival, you'll be interested in this invitation.
Ladies and gentlemen, an opportunity like this cannot be taken for granted.
This evening, we are going to be beating our hearts out for you all, so I want to see people enjoying themselves. So get up and feel the music and do something about it, okay?
This event is a rite of cultural democracy.
We have many, many partners, you included. I encourage you to stand alongside with us as we travel this journey year after year.
Good afternoon, and welcome to Money versus Nature, Sustainable Finance Solutions. Our moderator today is Kristen Reckberger, founder and CEO of Dynamic Planet. We also have Jad Daly, President and CEO of American Forests. We have Steve Case, Chairman and CEO of Revolution LLC, and Matthias Wilkstrom, the CEO of Doconomy. Take it away, Kristen.
Thank you, Rebecca. Hi, everyone, and thank you for being with us for this discussion on nature and money. My name is Kristen Reckberger. I founded Dynamic Planet about a decade ago, and our corporate mission is to advance markets that restore nature, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Traditionally, our capital markets have eroded nature, habitat loss in exchange for agriculture, massive overfishing in the ocean, and the pollution that we're all very aware of, such as runoff into the rivers, which also runs off into the ocean, and obviously our plastics crisis. And unfortunately, traditionally, nature has been taken for granted and free. And when things aren't valued properly, well, we don't value them. So it's difficult to put a monetary value on nature, but groups have tried to do it. And research tells us that nature is worth, want to take a guess? $125 trillion in ecosystem services to us every year. And just to give you some perspective, in 2020, before we were hit by COVID and the war in the Ukraine, the global GDP was $85 trillion. So thank you, nature. Business as usual, human production and consumption practices can continue to erode that value of nature. But the good news is people are realizing that nature plays a consequential role in the economy. In fact, nature underpins the economy, and indeed is our life support system. So rather than nature or economy, how about nature and economy and regenerative growth? Rather than take, use, and discard, how can we invest in the system that allows us to all prosper, including the rest of life on Earth? We have three great leaders with us today to share their views on this topic. I'll engage with each of them for a few minutes, and then we'll have a dialogue and open up to you as well, so get your questions ready. First up is Jad Daly, who is President and CEO of American Forests and an amazing coalition builder by the sound of it. American Forests is also part of the Trillion Trees program. And since we're here to talk about sustainable financing, we're curious about why our tax dollars and billionaires like Mark Benioff, who runs Salesforce, are investing in the humble, wonderful tree.
Thanks so much, Kristen. It's a real honor to join this panel today. And folks, if you came here for some Earth optimism today, I've got it for you. Because let me tell you, the tree is the magical device that we have been looking for. Think about this for a minute. It pulls carbon dioxide out of the air and it turns it into products that we can use. We put these magical devices in our cities and towns. It cools the air underneath them by 20 degrees to help us deal with extreme heat driven by climate change. It scrubs smog out of the air. And just looking at these magical devices, it makes people happier. It helps students learn better. It even helps patients recover more quickly from illness. So we have to get these magical devices that we call trees everywhere we possibly can. And here in the United States, we've identified 133 million acres from our cities to our large, beautiful natural landscapes where we can put billions more trees to get all those fantastic benefits. And that's part of a global movement to create 1 billion more trees on this planet to deliver that same benefit all across the world. And the neat thing about it is the investment opportunity of the lifetime. Why are people coming in? Because folks who care about our environment and who also care about our economy see a way to get all the different outcomes that they're looking for wrapped together in one. We can create 27 jobs per $1 million invested in this incredible nature-based solution to our greatest challenges. And so no wonder visionary companies like Salesforce, our friends over there in the Capitol, are investing through things like the infrastructure bill. The investment's coming in from all directions, public and private sector, to get trees everywhere we possibly can and reap these benefits.
That's great. There's also the ocean, which is doing a lot of work for us on the climate front as a nature-based solution. And currently only 7% of the world's ocean is protected and about 17% of the world's land. There's a movement right now for 30% of land and sea to be protected by 2030, and more governments and communities are on board with that by the day. Are you part of that?
100%. And let's just say really importantly, to get the benefits that we need from trees and forests, everything that I just described, it actually starts with keeping the trees and forests that we already have. And so 30 by 30 is a great initiative to say, let's conserve these fantastic natural resources, and then with activities like tree planting, let's add to them to grow our natural climate solutions.
Great. Now if we can go to Steve Case. Steve is a renowned American entrepreneur who literally put America online. And as CEO and chairman of Revolution, has for 15 years been investing and backing entrepreneurs at every stage of development. Steve, as a leader in the private equity sector, what trends are you seeing related to sustainability, including your own portfolio of companies?
Well, happy to answer that question, but first of all, I should say, wearing another hat as chair of the Smithsonian Institution, I can't say how proud I am that the Folklife Festival is back, and how proud I am that Earth Optimism is kind of nested within Folklife. And Earth Optimism was started about 5 years ago, really was trying to change the dialogue, exactly building on your introduction, which is instead of just viewing some of the issues around climate as a problem, which of course it is, shifting it to also recognize it's an opportunity and bring a somewhat more optimistic lens to it, which is likely the best way to galvanize more interest and attention and more action across all different sectors. So it's a very important effort. In terms of investment specifically, a little bit like I was saying with the broader context around climate, kind of shifting it from problem to opportunity. We've also seen that in the business sector, in the investment sector, shifting it from business contributing meaningfully to the problem but not being part of the solution to now pivoting to say these are great opportunities. There's both an imperative in society but also a business opportunity and investment opportunity. And that pivot has really accelerated over the last 5 years or so. There was an early phase going back 10, 15, even 20 years where investment in climate tech or green tech was generally unsuccessful. It was a little early. The capital requirements a little greater than people thought. The time horizon to have influence was a little longer than people thought. The technologies were not quite as fully developed as people thought. And so as a result, a lot of investors pulled back. But in the last few years, we've really seen an acceleration of that. It's now getting a significant amount of attention from venture capitalists backing new companies, as well as a lot of very large companies who recognize that they do have to be part of the solution. I can talk about some examples later, but I think that just sort of frames the overall discussion around why people are looking at this through that prism of both a little more hope, a little more optimism, a little bit more opportunity, which I believe will drive more capital and more change across the landscape of industry and society than when we historically were just focused just on the downsides of it, not shining a spotlight on the potential upsides of it. So it's been a great pivot for our society, a great pivot for business, and that is why you're seeing this acceleration in terms of investment that will have, I think, a pretty dramatic impact over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
That's so great. And obviously the work in the private equity will also lead to the public markets, and we're seeing a lot of changes in that this year.
Right.
And there's been a lot of discussion about ESG investing, which is environmental social governance investing, and how we can all be more responsible. If we're lucky to have retirement accounts or some money we want to put into the stock market, how can that be more responsible? So we might want to touch on that a little bit too. Matthijs Wikström with us from Sweden. You are doing some fun stuff through a company called Economy. And can you share with us what you're up to and how it relates to investing in nature?
Sure, thank you very much. I'd say that the overall perspective of this is exactly why this is an important session with the Earth Optimism, focus on optimism, and with the festival as such, is some of the more tangible climate action activities that we try to enable by enabling a sustainable lifestyle for all. And I was triggered by the solutions-oriented, no doom and gloom. Guys, we can do this. We have the tech, we have the money. The only thing we need to be mindful of is culture. According to the latest IPCC report, which is the Intergovernmental Climate Change Panel for Climate Change, basically what they said is culture eats climate for breakfast. And obviously without the cost, without the consequence, I'm not going to throw Newton's third law at you, but if there's a reaction, there needs to be, an action needs a reaction. And this is a beautiful reaction to what we've been doing for so many years. At Economy, we try to educate the many, we try to provide digital tools, we try to use finance and the efficiencies that we have built shaping wealth over so many years, and these efficiencies that are among the greatest on the planet, to cater to the fragilities of the ecosystem, both land and sea. Some of the tools that we do is that we enable people to understand their carbon footprint, working together with the UNFCCC, setting up a carbon calculator for our lifestyle choices, educating the many around, what happens when I do this and what happens when I do that. I'm very happy to see that the Tokyo Metropolitan Government just a month ago, we recently opened up in Tokyo as well, were so intrigued by this, so they want to do it as a mandatory educational tool for all of the high school students in Tokyo and the prefectures beyond. And we need to start somewhere in education and understanding how can you engage someone something you don't understand. And of course, us, working in this sector, we're up to our ears in data and in solutions and in challenges and in networks. But it's not about us, We can at best show the way and provide tools and act according to our own conscience. It's about the many. And at Economy, I don't think that we're going to have a few people doing everything. We're going to have all people doing something. And that's where culture will protect the climate. And we don't necessarily have to look forward. Many of the times we only have to look a little bit backward and see how we have protected the planet that we live on for so many years before industrialization, before digitalization, before globalization. It's time for a sustainabilization. And I think those tools are what we try to provide for everyday climate action.
That's great. And Matthias, you mentioned that you're driving this transparency and data with your tools, and that's so necessary for supply chain management and other business sector pieces. But we have our personal economy too, as well, right? So can you talk a little bit about your partnership with MasterCard and some of the other ways you're thinking about the lifestyle economy and other areas of focus?
Sure, and I think it comes back and corresponds well with the notion that when there is no consequence, it doesn't matter. It needs to come with a cost, and it's sort of an individual triple bottom line, if you may. So we connect to every transaction. We connect a carbon intensity to the very category that you've been spending in. So being mindful of the fully automated and the need for something that works seamlessly, because I'm super lazy, and if it works on me, it probably works on the many. But also respecting integrity and privacy. So the category level calculations provide you with an estimate of the carbon footprint of your purchase representation, spend-based calculation, not activity-based calculations as dictated in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. Then you get an understanding of what has done, and then we direct you to partners like Patch or working with MasterCard. Now the methodology is implemented in their global transaction platform in order to drive reforestation, other very sound carbon offsetting initiatives. On World Ocean Day in May last year, we actually talking about the ocean. We also incorporated freshwater intensity, putting a water score, not only a carbon score on every transaction. That is now live in Pakistan, it's going live in Poland. And safe direct access to fresh water is, to many people around the world, a greater challenge today than the climate crisis will ever have the time to become, looking at what's going on in South America, South Africa, parts of Asia. So we need to treat this as a climate inclusion opportunity rather than just a toolbox of ideas for different contexts.
That's great. Yeah, obviously we're facing a few converging crises: climate, biodiversity, equity, and transparency and data can help us all make better decisions with our resources, right? Our time and money. Do you want to talk a little bit about that in the context of American forests?
I sure do. I was going to dive in if you didn't invite me to. And I want to thank all of you for being here and for starting looking for hope, looking for optimism. Because right now, I think the conversation, as you said, feels sometimes like it's taking us back to a place of despair and inaction. And hope comes from taking action. The beauty of this magical solution that I was describing with trees and forests and things like going out and planting more trees from our cities to our large landscapes is everyone can participate. This coalition that I mentioned, 1T.org, it's governments to Girl Scouts. And to your comment about equity, it has a particular focus on equity. Did you know that a map of trees in our cities here in the United States is also a map of income and a map of race in ways that transcend income? That on average, the lowest income neighborhoods in America have 41% fewer trees. The communities of color, majority communities of color, regardless of income, have 33% less tree cover. And as I was describing, that has life or death implications on these blazing hot days. That means you have worse air quality in your neighborhood. So as we do this work, we must bring the lens of equity to it. And here's how it all ties together. So we're talking about hope, giving people a chance to take action in their own neighborhoods, to better their lives, to take control over climate change, to find climate justice. But we can also create economic justice in the same vein. We can create 27 jobs per $1 million invested in doing this work of creating tree equity in our cities, struggling rural communities, restoring burned over and degraded landscapes. So it's really, if you think about our vision for the environment, our vision for equity, our vision for our economy, it all comes together in investing in this new nature economy that we're creating around things like trees and forests.
And Steve, any of us following your work have been really inspired by the investments you've made, and not in certain pockets of America, but across America. Do you want to speak a little bit about what you've experienced in some of these investment opportunities that you've been taking advantage of?
Yeah, in the last decade, for those who don't know the data, venture capital, which not every company wants or needs, but the most successful companies that grow the fastest, create the most jobs, create the most economic growth, typically do raise venture capital. But the venture capital investments have been focused on a few places. And for the better part of a decade, 75% of the venture capital dollars have actually only gone to 3 states.
Wow.
California, New York, and Massachusetts. And given these new companies are the big job creators, not small business, not big business, but new business, that's part of the reason we have some communities rising, doing really well, some communities struggling, sometimes in a decline, sometimes brain drain, sometimes issues around drugs and other kinds of things. So trying to level the playing field so you get more capital in the hands of more entrepreneurs in more places to create new ideas that can scale into significant businesses is important. A couple examples that we've invested in at Revolution in eastern Kentucky, kind of what used to be known as Appalachia coal country. A company called App Harvest started a few years ago, now has the largest indoor kind of greenhouse in the country, uses 90% less water, has created 600 jobs just in the past 5 years, recently went public. And not too far from here in Richmond, Virginia, a company called Temper Pack decided that styrofoam was a terrible thing for the environment, created a more sustainable packaging solution that food companies like HelloFresh are using, so food delivered to people's homes can stay cold but not need styrofoam, and also being used for pharmaceuticals where you have to keep the drugs cold. That company just a couple months ago raised $140 million from Goldman Sachs. So it's an example of a significant investor finding this company in Richmond, Virginia. Not too far from here also in Georgetown, a company over a decade ago started called Sweet Green, which is a fast casual restaurant concept with the idea that the industrial food system needed fresh thinking and the kind of foods that a lot of people were eating a lot of the time were not unhealthy and they're bad for them and bad for the environment. That company has also scaled quite significantly. Also in the last year went public. Another one in Chicago, Reapley, is focused on the circular economy, recognizing that within existing organizations, somebody has something that they're not really using anymore. Somebody else somewhere else needs one of those things, often goes and buys a new thing, and so it's essentially an exchange network. So the products can go to the people that that need it, and you can really scale it to the next level. So there's many dozens and dozens and dozens, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples of these companies that are focused on sustainability, focused on obviously generating a profit, but also having a broader purpose and a broader impact. And it's not just in the places like Silicon Valley or people focus a lot of attention on. It's really spread all across the country. I think over the next decade, people are going to be surprised by how many really significant companies, including a lot that are focused on climate and sustainability, are in different parts of the country, not just on the coast. So it's another reason to be hopeful and optimistic that we're headed, I think, towards a more inclusive innovation economy. So it'd be more places, and the last point I make is more people. The other data around venture capital is pretty unbelievable. Is if you look at women, they're 50% of our population, get less than 10% of venture capital. Black Americans are 13% of the population, get less than 1% of venture capital. So venture capital goes to certain people in certain places and is not spread by any stretch evenly, does not kind of recognize that different people in different places have good ideas too. And so, that will be a way to usher in a more inclusive innovation economy. That might even be a way to see some of these cities that have been in decline start rising again. That might be a way to even kind of knit together some of the divides in this country that we see, down the mall, that play out sometimes in Congress, where there's a lot of folks who do feel frustrated, left out, angry. How do we create more opportunity for them and more hope for them? So some of this relates to the economy, some of it relates to innovation, some of it relates to job creation, but a lot of it also is focusing on sectors, whether it be sustainability, healthcare, food and agriculture, some of the most important aspects of our lives that also happen to be some of the largest industries in the country. So it's encouraging to see what's beginning to happen. Still more needs to happen. It's still advantage if you're a white guy in Silicon Valley. It's still advantage if you're focused on a particular sector, software and other things, as opposed to some of these more complex systems change things. But it's starting to change. The pandemic actually has been an accelerator as some people have moved to other places, and some capital has started now flow to other places. So hopefully that will continue over the next decade.
That's so exciting. I think another thing that we're seeing a lot is it used to have to pull teeth for companies to disclose, water or carbon, and they really didn't have the internal resources to even look at that. Nobody was asking, and now it's becoming more and more standard. And Matthias, I don't know, in your work, or Steve, any of you could comment on, it used to be almost first mover disadvantage when you were in that part of a sector and you were opening up about the vulnerabilities or how far you had to go to meet a certain decrease in your footprint, basically, or in your production. How is that going, do you think? What are you seeing in that and on those trends?
No, I'm just so inspired sitting here listening. I just want to keep listening to you guys. I think the word I'm looking for when you're asking that question is comparability. Because without comparability, everything is just an opinion. And opinions can be this and that. Comparability is the fundamental driving force for a commercial relationship. I can choose that or I can choose something else over that because of factors, impact being one of them. Comparability today is just a joke when it comes to impact metrics, and that is something that we try to change. We're doing it bottom up and we're doing it top down. Bottom up, working with partners like MasterCard, the UN, you name it. We're working with banks today representing 750 million users across 32 countries on the same methodology, and also, a pretty good thing, I think, the same pricing of carbon when we convert back to impact. So fully rolled out, 750 million people around the world are adhering to the same price on carbon. Never happened before, and one of the most important components, I think. If we can't set a price on damage done, why would you stop damaging things? There is no consequence. But comparability in the corporate reporting is instrumental in order to incentivize companies doing what's right if you believe that having less of an impact and thinking longer than tomorrow is the right thing to do. And I think more and more people are getting there. In order for them to get incentivized, they also need to get funded. They also need to have good ideas in order to be able to act on the inside. I think we need to move away from the blame game. It's like it's the consumer's fault, or it's the producer's fault, or procurement will disclose this and that. It's all about providing the opportunities. And there is so much ground to cover. Looking at climate inclusion, also including gender equality. We're looking at representation at the wider perspective. We're looking at impact metrics for different areas of impact. And this needs to be translated with comparability into climate action. And I think data is the best that has happened since sliced bread in regard of getting that done. Because data is a universal language. If it's treated with integrity and if it's not corrupted, it can be the best thing to get us out of this mess that we have all succeeded in getting in together. However, what brings me the most hope when looking at comparability is something completely different, and you're touching on it. If we can make it profitable to save the planet, obviously the planet will be saved in no time. So going from greed to green. Since we set up, and I represent a small startup working out of Stockholm in Sweden, far, far away. I did go to high school in Fairfax, Virginia, so I'm very happy to be back. But if we're looking at that, we also need to take into account what is the commercial interest. Since we started, we've had over 200 investors reaching out to us, interested in, how can we on board with this? And to me, it's stronger than 750 million having direct access to comparable impact metrics. 200 investors thinking, this is the tomorrow. This is where growth is. This is where fortune lies. And if fortune is future, and that is connected to the planet, I think we're going to be in a good place sooner rather than later. But we need to look at it as a positive cocktail effect. It's not getting just the data right, or getting the metrics right, or getting the tree planting or the ocean. It's a positive cocktail effect of many different things. There is not the one single silver bullet. The only silver bullet I would refer to is what I said before, activities like this, getting people together and starting doing things. Hence, we wanted to name our company Do Economy instead of Economy, because economy got us here, and Do Economy, where we all can contribute in doing something for each other and for the planet, is what we would like to see happening.
That's great.
Thank you.
So you brought up comparability, and we think of climate, and it reminded me of carbon, which is one molecule. And a lot of groups are struggling with the biodiversity crisis, the habitat loss, and again, 30 by 30 is this great movement to help protect 30% of land and sea by 2030, but we also have to manage 100% of the planet well. The other 70% is really, really important to sustainably manage. And I'm excited about some of the tools you're talking about, because we now need to move into this complex piece of habitats, and it's not just one molecule. And we knew about climate change from the 70s, and finally we've honed in on carbon, and everybody's measuring against that, and we know what we need to do by when for the ocean space. And it's been amazing to see in the last decade more and more satellite visioning of what's happening in the ocean. So when we help get a place protected, we can see clearly from space what's going on in that area. And also artificial intelligence can calculate all sorts of different pieces of boat movements. And we're just able to see a lot more in addition to the live work we can do underwater. And there's more and more robotics and other work that are helping us see things under the surface versus over. In reforestation, you can see, and deforestation, you can see a lot from space. So there's all these tools and technologies, from satellites all the way down to our computer data transparency algorithms, that are helping us hopefully invest and move trends in smarter, better ways. But how do we really get to the next patterns of GIS, mapping, biodiversity, habitat loss, biodiversity loss, and track that replenishment?
Ooh.
Can I actually start with
Sure.
a really simple thought for our Hope friends here today, which is that we're at a moment right now, we need multitasking solutions. Right, we can't solve climate change over here and equity over there and our biodiversity crisis over there. We need to find those things that do all of those things simultaneously. And the beauty of it is, 80% of the wildlife species on Earth live in trees and forests. So when we're using trees and forests and expanding trees and forests to help address climate change, to help protect us from heat waves and all the other things I've already described, we're also planting habitat. So organizations like mine and our great partners I was talking about in this coalition, 1T.org, we do exactly that overlay exercise that you described. So we look at places that are great opportunities to plant forests that will sequester a lot of carbon, but then we overlay that with how will they be for habitat? What are the endangered species that would also benefit? And we're all prioritizing our investment into those places where we can get that same double benefit. Just the same way in cities, we're investing into those neighborhoods where we most need tree equity. And so I think it's about that stacking exercise. You're exactly right, Kristen, that technology has a huge role to play. We have this computer mapping technology now where we can make literally a layer cake of benefits. Take everyone's benefits I just described, we can map each one, and then we can stack them on top of each other and see where those benefits come together most forcefully. That's where we need to invest. But my last thought here, Kristen, is that we need to think about investment in that same way. So the folks who are investing for climate, the folks who are investing for biodiversity, the folks who are investing for equitable and equitable economic development, we need to start weaving those dollars together to match the multiple benefit solutions that we're delivering. And that's when we're really going to get to scale on these kinds of opportunities.
I'll just add on the oceans front, work with Kristen and others on a National Geographic initiative called Pristine Seas. Started over a decade ago. It focused on marine protected areas. Been very successful. But one of the critiques a decade ago when it was getting started was it would be hard to get governments to make this move, although they've made a lot of progress there, leveraging the National Geographic brand and the ability to create media and doing economic research to really prove the benefits for countries to create these marine protected areas. But there was always this concern about enforcement and transparency. If you protected them, how do you actually make sure they remain protected? And that was one of the concerns 10 years ago. The advancement of technology has really enabled that checking on things to make sure the protected areas remain protected and there's not some different companies that are in those waters fishing when they're not supposed to be. So that is a great example of an initiative that made a lot of sense when it first got started, had a lot of initial traction, but because of new technologies that have been accelerated over the next decade, are now able to do a much better job of making the case that if you make this, that you protect this area, here are all the benefits to your communities, to your economy, and here are ways we can ensure that really indeed is protected. So it's exactly what you're talking about, Kristen, an example of using technology to accelerate the growth of key areas, in this case more about on the ocean front, but the same dynamic has happened on every front, really.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and to build on that, biodiversity is probably to me the most scary thing. I think looking at 50% loss of species mid-century, and we have 12 a year normally. I think that is something that we need to be very mindful of, but with tech we can be tracking biodiversity, land use, satellite monitoring, and it sounds like woohoo, now we're going to look into your kitchen and see what's on your sandwich. That's not we're not going to do that. But what it is that last, let me see, the Stockholm Plus 50, which was the 50-year celebration of the first environmental UN conference in 1972, just happened a month ago in Stockholm. And in order to make that something that resonates with everyone instead of just the ones in the conference, we put on billboards, digital billboards, live broadcasting of satellite data of emissions over Sweden in real time. Just to illustrate that, guys, the data is out there. We know what's going on. We can track and follow this. And also, of course, in reforestation, you can track and measure the intensity, and if the projects are transparent enough with the actual claims that they take to the market. There's a company called Earthbank today working with the European Space, Secretariat or something like that, making use of satellite data in order to drive transparency, protect what needs to be protected, and understand where we're losing the most. But I think biodiversity and land use is something that we're looking at as impact factors, because it makes perfect sense to connect that to your point. This is not a double-decker. This is like a triple-decker of opportunities in understanding that we can have purposeful additionality in regard to what we try to achieve. And by doing so, we also engage more and more people and make more and more friends on the way, because different topics resonate in different ways with different people in different cultures in different parts of the world. The only thing that we potentially can agree on is that there is one planet. And what can we do to do our best to take best care of it? But that will have different meaning to everyone, and that recognition is something of the most important, I think, especially looking at the ocean and what's going on. And I love the ocean. That's where I go for mental cleansing, as I call it.
Great. Well, let's go. We've talked a lot about business, and we'll take questions for the audience in a minute. Just one more question, maybe to you, Jad, on what role can government play in climate finance? It feels like we can really ride that momentum for biodiversity off of climate finance if we're smart.
110%. You know, it's very inspiring actually to be having this conversation today here within sight of the Capitol. Because, you know, our friends in Congress and our friends in the Biden-Harris administration deserve an immense amount of credit. In the last 2 years, they've made the biggest investments in forests as a climate change solution in history. In particular, the infrastructure bill, the bipartisan, importantly, infrastructure bill, invests $10 billion in things like reforestation and protecting our forests from wildfire. President Biden on Earth Day issued an executive order directing all federal agencies to determine how they can help contribute to forests and other natural climate solutions. And with, I'm really proud to say, an intense focus on these equity issues, including tree equity in cities that I've talked about, and with a focus on how to turn natural climate solutions into an economic solution as well. So we're getting tremendous leadership right now from the federal government. States and local governments are also making unprecedented investments in these solutions. And so I really appreciate your question, because we need to keep that up. But also we need to think about how these public dollars and private dollars come together most strategically. Too often we kind of say it's one or the other. We actually need to think about them as all part of the same pie, and we need to weave them together very strategically to invest in the most important things.
Okay, lots of stacking and aligning, stacking and aligning. Questions from the audience? Anyone?
Hey there, y'all. I just saw this was happening, popped a seat, and I'm glad that I did. Thank you for the conversation. A question that comes to my mind, I work in the agriculture space, and a big conversation is around carbon markets right now, right? The potential for corporations to essentially offset their emissions by partnering with a farm, say, initiating a number of conservation practices. But I have to say, that idea is something I'm a little skeptical of, right? Where these corporations, through public-private partnership, are just able to kind of cover up, right, the harmful and destructive practices that they're using by saying we're offsetting it while still using those practices in a way that long-term is still going to create negative impacts for our environment. I'm just wondering if folks have experience with that, if folks have thoughts on that.
That's a really great question, and regenerative agriculture is definitely becoming a thing, including outside the United States, and it's excited to see governments starting to incentivize that so that groups can replenish their soils with the right types of nutrients and everything else. And there's a lot of work to do. Does anyone want to address that?
Can I offer two quick thoughts? I love your question. Thank you so much for being here. So number one, when you talk about agriculture and climate solutions, I just have to mention agroforestry. It's where forests and agriculture come together, fusion cuisine for natural climate solutions. And it's actually, what the science tells us, one of the biggest opportunities. We can turn farms and ranches into carbon powerhouses by just weaving trees in with agricultural operations. So that's one of the most scientifically proven opportunities, I think, to get agriculture into the game of natural climate solutions, and that's the kind of opportunity we ought to be investing in. That's thought number one. Thought number two is, you're right to look at carbon markets critically and skeptically. And I've been working on this issue for 15 years. They've evolved a lot. They've come a long way. There's been a lot of trial and error. And I think the good news is that there are some very credible types of offset credits that are being created, so that for companies that have emissions that they can't abate, a great example would be airlines at this point in time don't have an alternative to aviation fuel. And so right now, while they're inventing, that sustainability solution that will enable them to be carbon free, using offsets, really credible, verifiable offsets with activities that we absolutely know are pulling more carbon out of the atmosphere and wouldn't happen otherwise, is going to get us a better climate result than just sort of taking that option off of the table. And so you're absolutely right. We need to do it the right way. It's probably going to be a much narrower opportunity than what people thought 10 or 15 years ago, but it has a place. And I can tell you from working directly with different companies, you would be extremely impressed and reassured by the seriousness with which sustainability officers in companies every day right now are trying to figure this out. There's some of the fiercest climate hawks I know are people who work for companies who are charged with figuring out how to get them to net zero, and they take those questions absolutely as seriously as you do, and they're pushing everybody who's producing offsets to do better and do more and even set the bar higher.
I'll just add to that, I've learned over the years that the business world can kind of be separated into attackers and defenders. The attackers are the entrepreneurs, the disruptors coming up with new ideas. The defenders are the incumbents, the larger companies that are more, like in sports, a little bit more in protect mode. I've been mostly focused on empowering the attackers, and some of the examples I mentioned, some of the companies we backed at Revolution are examples of that. But I also think it's important, particularly as we are here for talk about Earth Optimism, is that we encourage some of those defenders to take steps. It may not be perfect, but sometimes perfect is the enemy of good. And getting them, making them understand the importance of taking steps and taking their first steps and their second steps and their third steps, I think is important. So I agree there's some challenges in the carbon markets, but I actually want companies to not just feel criticized for considering starting down that path, but start down that path with the idea that over time maybe other options emerge that expand their perception. Part of the problem I perceived 10, 20 years ago was it was more of a critique of companies and more of a cynicism of companies, which made them less likely to do anything. Because if they were going to be criticized for doing something, then they might not do it. We have a little of this going on. You mentioned with ESG. There's some of the companies that have announced specific ESG goals. Even some companies creating ESG committees. Now the SEC has started some investigations to make sure their claims are in fact accurate, which at one level makes sense, because you want to make sure people are being serious about this in terms of tracking things and reporting things, but probably will result in fewer companies taking the path of making specific ESG goals. So all these things are a balance in terms of moving forward, trying to build progress.
I think this is one of the most important questions because it boils down to trust. And if we are going to get something done, we need to trust in the tools that we bring to the market. And at some stage, it also comes down to language, and we now see a lot of crackdowns on communication where there is research showing that 100% of the climate claims by companies are only adhered to by 30%, which is a very low number, but it's not really the number that pisses me off. It's that they are playing with the trust of people in getting it done. And if people lose faith, if they lose trust in that this can be done and that we are all trying our best, then we will have other challenges. At the end of the day, to me, it comes down to fundamental financial analysis. Follow the money. Just follow the money. Are they investing in what they're saying that they're doing, or are they just buying offsetting to maintain unsustainable business models? Mm-hmm. Then that choice is up to you as a consumer. Who do you want to vote for at the next checkout? I would probably vote for someone else.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. Great question. And obviously, we're quite optimistic about using the power of the markets to restore versus erode nature. And we're really happy that you've been with us today. And thank you to Earth Optimism, the organizers and sponsors of this great festival. And as chair of Smithsonian, I'm going to hand it back to Steve Case to close us out.
Well, as I said at the beginning, it's great to be back on the mall with the Folklife Festival. Great to have an in-person, obviously a lot of people will be tuning in virtually, but in-person event focused on Earth Optimism. I'm proud to have the opportunity to chair the Smithsonian. For those who don't know it, it's 176 years old. We have 19 museums that get typically 30+ million visitors, many that you see here on the mall. And we also are really accelerating our digital outreach, what we call Virtual Smithsonian. Also have a lot of science operations, really the largest museum research educational complex in the world, and something that is kind of uniquely American, in part because it has supported with congressional funding as well as philanthropic support, as well as some businesses that generate profits to fuel the mission. So it's an important institution, has been for a long time, has been a key anchor here in Washington, D.C., particularly on the Mall. Many people come to Washington to see the Smithsonian's in person. Our focus over the next 10, 20 years is to not just wait for people to come to us, because not everybody will have the opportunity to come to us. We want to go to them and take the Smithsonian to every home and every classroom. So look forward to doing that. But in the meantime, we'll keep doing what we can to make sure we attract people to the Mall for the Folklife Festival, and keep doing what we can to shine a spotlight on the great things, the hopeful things, the optimistic things that are happening through Earth Optimism. So thank you all for coming.